In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your rear wheel bearings on this Dodge Ram 1500. These will be located on your rear axle. Now when you do this job, it is also recommended that you replace the seal since you have to remove it to get to the bearings, so I have both. Let's get started. With the truck safely raised and supported, use a 22mm socket, remove the lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. From the backside of the caliper, you can see the two 21mm headed bolts that hold the caliper and bracket assembly with the pads onto the rear axle. Let's remove both of these and set the caliper aside. I'll leave this one in a couple threads to hold everything while I remove the lower. Take this out, take this out, slide the caliper off of the rotor, and now you don't want to let it hang by the brake hose, so I'll hang it with a hook or a bungee cord, or you could place it on top of the rear axle. Now remove your rotor. If yours is stuck on here, you can tap with a hammer right between the lug studs. That should break it free off of the axle hub surface. However, make sure that the parking brake shoes are not what's making it stuck on here, because if that's the case, either your parking brake is applied, the cable could be seized, or the shoes might be adjusted too far out. Now with the rotor off, we can see our brake shoes and all of the hardware. At this point, I prefer to remove the brake shoes. You don't necessarily have to, but I like to do this to keep them away from any gear oil that might spill all over them. Also, mine are in poor condition, so I'm also replacing them. Each brake shoe will be secured on each side with one of these little clips. To get these out, you have a few options. I'm just going to punch them out downward with a pry bar. That unlocks the shoe. This pin can push through now. And do the same to the forward-facing shoe. With both of those undone, you should be able to pry these apart. Doing this allowed us to pull them slightly upwards, and in doing so, we've exposed our adjuster, which happened to have fallen off. Sometimes they get stuck up here. This one's actually in great shape, not even seized. A lot of times they do seize. So we'll set this one aside. I'll show you how to clean and lubricate that. And then we have this top spring, which you can either take off by hand or with some pliers. Just unhook it from the shoe. There we go. Inspect all this hardware that comes out. This one's in okay shape, although I do have new hardware to reinstall. You can reuse these. If they look like they're stretched, bent, or extremely rusted out, definitely replace them. Now you can take your shoes, spread them apart. One of the lower springs just fell out, that's all right. And there they are with the other lower spring attached here. This one's definitely in very poor condition. These are our lower springs. It's important to note that they have a longer end and a shorter end. The longer end will face towards the rear of the truck, especially here on the driver's side. So you want to pay attention how they come off so that you can reinstall them the correct way. Down at the bottom here, you have your parking brake lever. Now this is supposed to pivot just like that, as well as obviously back and forth, but you want it to be freely moving. Mine, surprisingly, is moving. Now, if yours was stuck, you would take a hammer it this way, hammer it that way, spray some rust penetrant on it, and it should break free, and eventually we'll do this. It might take a little bit of time, but you want to achieve this so that when you do apply the parking brake, it can actually apply evenly to both shoes. It is now time to remove our differential cover. First, we want to make sure that we can fill it. Now in our case, we have a rubber plug right over here, so let's just make sure that that comes out. It's just good practice, even though this is just a rubber plug. I have a collection bucket underneath just in case fluid comes out. Perfect. This means we're clear to take off our cover. Just for now, I'm going to slide this right back in. With a 13mm socket, a swivel, and a small extension, I'm going to remove all of these bolts that hold the cover onto the differential. I'll start towards the bottom so that if the seal does break free, fluid can just drip down into my pan as opposed to all over my tool. They're all out, but this is still sealed up. I'm going to put one of the bolts back up at the top so that as I try to break this free, this whole cover doesn't just randomly fall off if it does completely break free. I'll use a flat chisel and try to break the bottom free without bending the pan too much. I also want to pay attention to where my drain pan is. It's all going to start pouring out from the bottom, and for that reason I'm going to start breaking it free from the side to avoid getting it all over my hands and my tools. There we go. We'll let that drain for a minute. Let's remove our last bolt from the top and remove our cover. Now, this is what you'll see inside the differential. We'll have to spin one of the wheels until we get to the side where this cutout has a bolt in it, and that is right over here. I'm actually going to try to aim it slightly downward, right about there. With an 8mm or 5/16 socket, actually preferred because a 5/16 fits better, break free and remove this bolt. Once you back it out enough, you should be able to do this by hand. Take this out, set that aside in a safe spot. Now what you want to do is take the drive shaft and spin it so that this pin in the center faces downward. And then reach up behind it and push it. All right, once you push it through a little bit, if it seems to be getting stuck, you could very gently grab it with some pliers. Grab the axle that you're trying to remove, wiggle it. As you wiggle the pliers, that should allow this pin to come right out. Sometimes it just creates some odd pressure on the gears, that's all. All right, there it is. At this point, do not spin the differential, as the spider gears in there can pop out. Now take the axle that you're trying to remove and push it inward from the outside. That's going to look like this on the inside of the differential, and that will drop this little C-clip. If you have a magnet, you can more easily fish this out. Take that, and this just unlocked your axle. Now take your axle from the outside, pull it straight out. I have a rag in my hand just because fluid will leak, and I just want to wipe the axle as I pull it out. There we go. And set this aside. It's time to take out our seal. Use a pry bar if you have one that's strong enough and pop it out just like that. If not, you can also use a seal puller. There we go. I'm going to wipe this area off just to get any of this debris out of here. Looks like there's some old grease, some oil. Now we'll have to use a special tool, which is a rear axle bearing puller. This is what it looks like. You want to find the correct size, so you want to make sure it freely fits in the axle tube, but is of course wider than the inside diameter of the bearing. You stick it right in here, make sure it's flat, bring this washer closer, and you tighten up this mounting nut, which secures the tool onto the bearing. Get that nice and snug on there. On the end, I'll put my slide hammer on. With the slide hammer, we can pull this bearing out. There it is. To remove the old bearing from the tool, just release this mounting nut, and there it is. Clean up the area, making sure that there's no debris. Looks like I have some oil that's gunked up with metal dust here. This will also help me to inspect the axle tube, because sometimes it can be damaged, especially if your wheel bearing is past the point of being bad and it has spun inside the axle tube. Everything looks pretty good here, so let's get our new bearing installed. Take your new bearing, install it. It is not directional. It does not matter which direction you put it in. And then you'll need a bearing and seal installer. Make sure it's the exact diameter of the outer race of the bearing. Not too big or it won't fit, and not too small or you'll hit the inner race, the cage actually, and that's going to damage the bearing. So at this point, we'll slowly hammer it in. And that is fully seated. I'm going to give it a couple more taps just to be sure. Yep, you can hear an audible difference in when this bottoms out. It changes from a hollow sound to a more full sound because it's bottomed out up against that inner lip and it is resonating through the entire differential slightly differently. This is now installed, so let's put our seal over. When you hammer this seal in, you want to only hit on this outer lip, not in the center. So slide it on to the axle. Now if you don't have a seal installer that is this size, you can just use a block of wood, put it flat. Of course, be careful of your ABS sensor not to hit on that, and then just use a rubber mallet or a hammer and tap this in. All right, that's fully bottomed out, and that is installed. This differential takes 75 W140 oil, so I will take some of that oil and add it to this bearing. That way, even though we will fill the differential, obviously, it is directly lubricated by this oil that I'm applying. Now take your axle, carefully slide it back in, not to damage the seal. Once you get to right about here, you'll have to wiggle it around to make sure that it actually fits in the splines on the differential. Might take a little bit of trial and error, some spinning. Oh, there we go. That just went in. Now you want to make sure that the surface where the bearing rides is clean and free of debris. Mine is, so I'm going to push it in all the way, carefully. Give it a couple twists. Oh, that just seated perfectly. I'm going to push it all the way in so that we can actually lock it with that clip. And at this point, do not rotate the axle because the spider gears can move around. With the axle pushed through all the way, install your clip. It's got a rounded edge and a squared off edge. The rounded edge faces the inside of the differential. The squared off edge will face this ring gear. If needed, push this axle in a little more. There we go. Now pull the axle out, and that is locked in. As you can see right here, be very careful when you spin this because you don't want to spin the spider gears. Let's put in the pin that locks everything together. It's going to have a hole on it. That needs to line up with the bolt hole so we can lock it. And it's going to have 4 flat sides. Those need to be on either ends. You might need to move the spider gears around a little bit if they're not perfectly lined up anymore. Okay, there we go. That's almost all the way in. Before it goes completely in, I'm going to use my bolt and line it up so that once it does go through all the way, I can just stick this in without any interference issues. Perfect, right there. If you can't get the bolt through at this point because it's not in the right spot, you can spin the differential, no problem, and position it where you need it. Perfect. We'll thread this in. That's bottomed out. I'll give it a little bit extra. That'll hold the axle from spinning. There we go. That's nice and tight. Now let's clean the mating surface where the cover goes onto the differential. I'm going to use a gasket scraper. You could use a razor blade if that's what you have. Something that won't gouge the surface but will clean up all of this old RTV so we can then of course apply new RTV. I recommend covering the differential while you scrape the top so no debris makes its way in it. Use a rag that you care about deeply, that way it gets ruined. Once you have it nice and clean, spray it down with some brake parts cleaner. And if you have access to compressed air, go ahead and blow dry it, especially inside all of these mounting holes. If you don't have access to compressed air, just let it air dry over time. And now you want to do the same to the differential cover. Scrape off all the old RTV, clean it and degrease it, and then we'll apply new RTV. And of course, take that rag out. It's time to apply some new RTV to this surface. You could go on the differential side or on the cover side, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to connect all the threaded holes with my RTV and then we'll install the cover. My RTV is spread around evenly, and I have my pan cleaned up, degreased, ready to go. So I'm going to carefully bring it up into position. I have some bolts ready, that way I can at least start them. I also cleaned up the threads on the bolts just because they had RTV on them from the previous coating. All right, once I put 2 in, it'll hold it on and I can install the rest of my bolts. With all my bolts attached, I'm going to bottom them out. Then we'll wait a little bit for this RTV to start curing, and then we'll torque them down fully to spec. I'm going to tighten this in a cross pattern, that way everything can seat evenly. Torque all these bolts in a cross pattern to 30 foot-pounds. These are all torqued. Double check them if you want. Now remove your fill plug. We might as well fill it at this point. Now you want to make sure you are on flat level ground. Because I'm on a lift, I know that this is accurate, but if you're working on jack and jack stands and just the rear of the truck is raised up, this is not going to be accurate, so you want to wait until the end. This differential takes 2.3 quarts of 75W140 oil, so let's just fill it up until it starts trickling out of the fill plug. Oh, that's it. It's starting to run out, and at this point, cap this off. I'm going to give this a quick spin just so I can lubricate all sides of this rubber plug. That way, it slides in a whole lot easier. And of course, we'll wipe down anything that leaked. My backing shield is new. However, if yours was rusted and old, you'd want to clean off these areas where the shoes touch with a wire brush or a file, whatever you can do to get it nice and flat. And then we'll coat it with a very thin layer of either brake grease or silicone paste that is rated for brakes. That's what I'll be using. This will ensure smooth operation of the shoes and will avoid any sort of noises such as squeaks or grinding noises as you apply the parking brake. Apply some on the bottom where the shoes sit. Now we need to attach the shoes together at the bottom with those 2 springs that go on the front and on the back of them. So the bottom is going to be the side with the double cutout. The top is going to be the side with a single wide cutout. Take one of your springs that goes on the bottom, and remember it has the longer end and the shorter end. The shorter end will go on the forward-facing shoe for my application because I'm working on the driver's side. The longer end towards the back of the truck. We'll hook this on just like this, just one of them, the one that goes on the rear. We'll slide these shoes into position. Like that. That spring will somewhat hold them in place. Now it's difficult to see here, but what you want is for the shoes to sit right down in this support at the bottom. The tabs that stick out need to go in here, and then of course it needs to line up with that lever. Also at this point we're going to have to install the outer spring. We'll hook it on to the shorter end first, and with a pry bar or a screwdriver I'm going to guide it onto the other side. To get this hooked in, I'll take a pick and just try to push it into its groove. Now let's press it. Perfect. So the bottom is installed. Now it's time to assemble things at the top. So we'll spread these shoes apart, and the first thing I want to put in here is the adjuster. The adjuster comes apart just like this. I have a new one, but on the original one it'll be the same. I'm going to back this star wheel off, and that's so I can apply some grease and then use this to work it into the threads and even it out. I don't want too much on here, but I do want it to be greased up and smoothly, freely spinning for a long time. So now we'll just thread this in, put a little bit of extra grease on here, and reinstall it into the other part. What I also like to do is put a little bit of grease where it contacts the shoes to prevent it from getting stuck in the future. I remember that my adjuster had the star wheel facing towards the front of the truck, so that's how I'll put it back on. Spread these shoes apart, and line it up, slide it in. And one more thing up top is going to be this spring. The cutouts for it are right above where the adjuster mounts. Kind of hard to see, but if you reach in there, you should be able to get it hooked on. To get this in, I'm going to use the same pick method that I used on the bottom. I have this partially hooked in, I just need to tap it to finish locking it in place. And there it goes. Perfect. So now all we have left to do is to attach the shoes to the backing shield with the pins and the little hooks. So take your pin and slide it in through the back side, line it up with the hole on the shoe, slide your clip in. Once it's on there, use a flathead screwdriver or a small pry bar to press it. It's got a little cutout that you can press on, and then you can either spin the pin or spin the tab, the clip, and that'll lock it in. There we go. That's locked in. We'll spin it so it's parallel with the shoe. Center these up. And do the same to the forward-facing shoe. My rotor mounting surface on the axle looks great. I know it's a little bit dirty, but it's just stained from a previous cleanup. That's fine. I'm going to add some anti-seize to the surface. That way the rotor doesn't corrode here in the future. If yours needed to be sanded down, you would use a soft sanding disc or a wire brush or a wire wheel on a drill and clean this up. You don't want any rust building up here, and you don't want the rotor not sitting flat. Otherwise it'll cause braking issues. If your rotor has corrosion on the backside, sand that down as well, make it nice and flat, and then we'll install it. Perfect. At this point, you can also check the adjustment of your parking brake. If needed, you can take this back off and then use the star wheel to expand or contract the shoes. What you're looking for is to just barely hear them touch at times. You don't want any drag on this. These are not drum brakes, of course, so you don't want them to be touching at all times. Optionally, once the wheel is on, if you want to test things with the parking brake on and the vehicle on the ground, you can go from the backside, remove that small rubber plug at the top, stick a flathead screwdriver in, pull up or down on it, and that will adjust your parking brake shoes. Bring your caliper back over, slide it over the rotor and onto the axle. Have at least one of the bolts ready to start on so you can let go and then start the other. We'll bottom these out and then torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Let's reinstall the wheel. Push it on all the way, install all 5 lug nuts, and then we'll bottom them out in a cross pattern. Now you want to torque the wheel in a cross pattern also to 130 foot-pounds. Double check them all. And there you have it. Job is done. We'll do the same to the other side.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.